Okay, welcome everybody. Good morning and welcome to this Pathology in Practice webinar in partnership with Beckman Coulter Diagnostics. My name is Andy Mile. I'm the editor of Pathology in Practice magazine and I'll be leading the presentation. The title of our webinar we have for you this morning is Laboratory Transformation in Conversation, Optimizing Specimen Reception with Performance Partnership and Continuous Improvement. And we're very pleased to be able to bring you leading voices from Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust and Beckman Coulter Diagnostics as part of the discussion, who will be detailing for you the process, the results, and the key lessons learned from their strategic partnership aimed at optimizing specimen reception and pre-analytics. We've allocated time at the end of the discussion for questions from our audience. These can be submitted to us at any time during the conversation via the Ask a Question button. Just look for the box at the top of your screen with the question mark in. Click that and you'll be able to send the question through to me and our speakers this morning. And we'll do our very best to answer as many questions as possible in the time we have with you this morning, which is up until 12 midday. So, time to welcome our speakers. Firstly, we're delighted to welcome Deborah Paget. Deborah is Clinical Pathology Head of Service at Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust and NENC, that's North East and North Cumbria, Pathology Network Operational Lead. Deborah is, of course, also a recent past president of the IBMS. Deborah has been a strong advocate for excellence in pathology services, and she's worked extensively with a wide variety of healthcare bodies on strategic initiatives, including the expansion of advanced practice roles, digital pathology adoption, and the implementation of national pathology transformation programs. In her current roles, Deborah provides leadership and operational oversight for pathology services across Northumbria and the wider NENC integrated care system. As Pathology Network Operational Lead for NENC, she has successfully transitioned the network from an emerging to a maturing status. She has also championed transformational change through digital pathology integration, streamlining workflows, and improving diagnostic accuracy. Deborah, good morning. Great to have you with us.
Morning, Andy. It's lovely to be here and looking forward to the conversation today.
Great stuff. And also joining us this morning from Beckman Coulter Diagnostics is Hugo Craven, who is Principal of the Performance Partnership Europe team. Hugo has 25 years experience working across healthcare markets and has partnered with public, private and NGO stakeholders to support startup, turnaround and sustainable organisations leading multidisciplinary teams through periods of change and growth. He focuses on building trusted partnerships, developing leaders, and creating the conditions for long-term impact and high-performing teams. And good morning, Hugo. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Andy. Thank you for inviting me, and morning, Deborah.
So Deborah, Hugo, and their respective teams were the authors of a poster presented at the most recent IBMS Congress, which detailed the collaboration between Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust and Beckman Coulter Diagnostics. They joined together in a strategic partnership aimed at optimizing specimen reception and pre-analytics with the aims of enhancing operational efficiency and fostering a culture of continuous improvement within the pre-analytics teams. So our conversation this morning will focus on that project, the challenges it met, the methods used, and the outcomes. So Deborah, if I can start with you, could you first of all give us a bit of background into the lab challenges which drove the decision to partner with Beckman Coulter Diagnostics, and can you talk about specifically some of the wider impact of the challenges you had in specimen reception?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a Northumbria point of view, we're actually a full laboratory service. We have laboratories at North Tyneside General Hospital, at Northumbria Specialist Emergency Care Hospital, out at Hexham, and then in the far north of our patch at Wansbeck. Although the two laboratories that we're really talking about this morning are NSEC and North Tyneside, and then more specifically North Tyneside, because of the way we receipt and receive samples into our service. So we have blood sciences departments on both NSEC and North Tyneside. NSEC, as an emergency care hospital, deals with a lot of our acute and our urgent sample work that comes in, and North Tyneside is therefore more of our cold laboratory, and it deals with deals with almost all of our GP work. As anybody that knows, delivering pathology for the GP population means that you get a huge glut of samples in the middle of the afternoon, pushing into the early evening, and that can cause huge challenges with the way those samples are received, the bottlenecking that causes both within specimen reception, but more importantly, the impact that has as it hits the front end of the main laboratory service and onto our analyzers. Our North Tyneside service is not a 24/7. We don't need it to be 24/7, but we do need it to work as efficiently and as effectively as it possibly can. And recognising those issues in specimen reception was something that we felt was a critical thing that we needed to work on. I think the other really important thing to note, this was at a time when we were about to do quite a massive transition of our IT and digital strategy as well. We were coming away from our legacy IT system, we were moving to a new system, and we understood that some of the efficiencies that could be gained through that, going to paperless workflows, removing plastic bags, doing all of the sustainability work as well, was something that we wanted to capitalise on. But we couldn't do that until we'd done the efficiency work in specimen reception first. So understanding the timeline of kind of the development, the improvement, the transformation process was absolutely critical. And all of that had to be done with a staff group that were keen to change, but had been doing the same way of working for a huge number of years, were well embedded in what they were doing, were highly proficient individuals, and they were really keen to get involved and understand how they could make it better. To paint a picture, our specimen reception was looking a little tired. It was a bit drab, Hugo, I think it was safe to say, before your guys came in. The teams all faced the walls. They didn't look at each other. There wasn't a huge amount of interaction. It really wasn't good for well-being, and just the way the system and the setup was set out. We knew there were issues. We knew there was things that we needed to do. We have experience in lean and driving change. But when something has been the way it's been for such a number of years, being able to link with an external partner to support you with this change journey and bring a fresh pair of eyes and a different perspective, but most importantly, come with an evidence base, was really, really beneficial for us. So that's why we started the conversation with Beckman Coulter, where we have our managed service with Beckman Coulter. We've had a long and really positive working relationship with the teams. And I was introduced to Hugo, who told me all about performance partnership. And I thought, this is our opportunity. We can do something with these guys to help really capitalize on how we can get the best efficiencies out of our specimen reception team. But my motto, my mantra all the way through this, and I think my opening gambit to Hugo when we had that very first meeting was, I want to do this with the team, not to the team. So how do we get them actively engaged right from the get-go? And that's where Hugo stepped in.
Okay. Hugo, with your perspective on it, could you talk a bit about the challenges which you discovered at Northumbria in Deborah's laboratories? How typical were they of problems that are faced in elsewhere, would you say?
Yeah, so yeah, when I first met Deborah, I think, you know, we met in a conference room in North Tyneside. I think it was a July or a June, so it was quite warm actually from my first time back in Newcastle for many years, and it really, I mean, what came out of that room from Deborah was that stability and transformation. She wanted a stable environment and she wanted to transform, and that was a conversation where we started. And really, it was just highlighting the fact, and as Deborah's just said, it wasn't really anything to do with the staff. It was more the process. They were inefficient, and they were perhaps ineffective for what Deborah and her team were trying to do. So that's where the conversation started, if I'm honest. And it was just looking to say, yes, you're probably right. You know, the issue was getting the samples onto the analyzers in a timely fashion. And that was kind of one of the key metrics that Deborah wanted to kind of sort out from point of receipt onto the machine. Can we do something to make that a quicker process? And then layered on top of that, as Deborah mentioned, was the fact that the staff there facing the walls, it was an environment that I think wasn't conducive to the team wanting to or being able to develop. And I think at that time, it was a bit of a struggle for them to kind of feel that this was a working environment that they were enjoying. I think was probably the best way to put it.
Okay, Deborah, could you sort of explain this a little bit before we move on about the wider impact of some of those challenges? What were some of the issues that you were hearing about from elsewhere in the healthcare system in Northumbria?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, we get the bulk of our samples kind of between 2 and 6-ish. And it's really important that we get those samples unbagged, PID checked, so making sure the sample matches the request form, because as I say, we were still paper at the time, making sure they're booked into the laboratory information management system, get that sample stabilized, so centrifuged and spun. All of that process happened within our specimen reception before the sample was then sent across the corridor to hit the front end of the analyzers. We were often having to ask people to work late beyond their hours. We weren't clearing the samples down. We were often having to fridge samples at the end of the day. So the impact on turnaround times, but to our patients as well. I think one of the critical things that one of our clinical biochemists, and actually our clinical lead for biochemistry, was really concerned about was, whilst we don't need to process GP samples quite as quickly as we were probably trying to, the impact was because we were trying to get the samples processed, we were often phoning out results to our on-call service, our wider system on-call service, where, for example, a potassium was out of range. And instead of being able to deal with that within our GP's working hours, it was then hitting the out of hours service, which often meant patients were having to present at the front door in ED. So that wider system impact of our inefficiencies was actually being seen across the whole system. So how could we smooth out those bottlenecks so that we got the samples through more efficiently, dealt with some of the results in working hours, and didn't have people inappropriately having to turn up at ED to have their results considered or further onward testing, because it really didn't need that, but that was the situation that we were in. And the staff satisfaction, the staff morale was an ongoing challenge. We were having to ask people to swap shifts, stay late. It was a stressful environment to work in for them. And that's also just never a pleasant way to work if you feel you're up against it all of the time. So how could we change that working environment completely to understand how we make it better from an aesthetics point of view, which probably wasn't one of our main goals, but certainly came out as part of the program as well.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where the performance partnership team at Beckman Coulter came in. So Hugo, could you tell us a bit about sort of how the partnership came about and how the goals of the partnership how the goals developed?
Yeah. So as I said, that first conversation with Deborah, it was very clear. It was about stabilization and kind of transformation. And I think it was a pivotal period for them because they were going to go down that WIMPATH road. And I think, if I remember Deborah saying, WIMPATH is really a catalyst for her. That was a catalyst to kind of get these tubes going smoother and quicker through the whole of that specimen reception. So I think based on that, we kind of fleshed out a few goals that we wanted, and Deborah's kind of mentioned the kind of enhanced efficiency piece. So eliminate those bottlenecks and get that maximum throughput as best we could before kind of WIMPATH came in, which would enhance that. So it's kind of get that operational design going first, and then WIMPATH would come in at the back end and fuel it as an extra catalyst, which is kind of one of the first ones that we looked at. The second one is that they did have this energy around continuous improvement. I think there was a philosophy there that they wanted to do things better. They had ideas, but they just didn't have the time and the resource to really get that up and running. And those are the conversations I had with Deborah, saying, well, you've got some great people here. Let us have a look and really understand, from our side, outside eyes, what we see. So in terms of some of the goals, it was, well, first of all, data would be really important. So we needed to kind of pull some data. So one of the goals was, can we get data? And then we can reflect that back to Deborah and the team and say, what we see, is this what you see? In terms of where we think that the lab is. So if we could foster that continuous improvement with some of our initiatives, that would be great. I think thirdly, we wanted to develop that workforce because they were keen to develop themselves, keen to go on this continuous improvement journey. So that was kind of probably the third one. And I think the fourth one, I think we kind of penned out as we were kind of having our initial discussions was, can we expand the impact? So whatever we do here, is this something that we can then take and put into NSEC, for example, the same sort of methodology, the same sort of process, the same sort of involvement. So those are kind of the four ones that we kind of fleshed out and looked at to start with. There's pretty much the kind of goals that we wanted to achieve. And it was all about efficiency and also about this whole culture and people development side as well.
Okay, fantastic. So that's the partnership and the goals. So now, Deborah, could you talk a little bit about the methodologies and solutions that were put in place to address those challenges? Where did you start?
Yeah, so if I start with how we kind of came together and what we talked about, and Hugo will go through some of the specific tools that the Danaher Business System is kind of the fundamentals of what we did all the way through this. So we'll talk about Kaizen and daily management and visuals, and they're all fabulous. But for me, how we pulled our team together, how we understood what our problem statement was, and some of this, as I said, are things that we've done before, but latching on to the DBS way of working, and having Hugo and Kian and Nasira and the team to create that headspace for us to think a little bit differently and to try some things out. I can't stress Hugo's team being able to take our group of change champions that they became and take them out of the laboratory, teach them these skills so they had the fundamentals of what DBS looked like, but then also had the opportunity to just try it in a safe space that they knew they weren't going to be criticized or have any particular challenge, and just give it a go. So finding those people was great. Some of them stood up naturally, some of them needed a little bit of cajoling to come along on the journey. But as Hugo said, presenting them with the evidence of what the problems were that we were trying to fix and empowering them to be able to do that themselves. So there was little to no management in those conversations at all. The team themselves were the ones that worked with Hugo's team and drove it forward. So Hugo, it's probably worth you talking through some of the methodologies that you taught my guys to use and they still know, understand and deliver now.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. So Des mentioned, the Danaher Business System. So that is a kind of a system of processes, which is our kind of operating DNA within Danaher. So it goes across everything from manufacturing and out. So that's how we look at our problems internally as a vendor, and those are tools that we use to kind of challenge ourselves to improve. So we have this toolkit, and in terms of the fact that it's proprietary for us, but we looked at the lab and said, well, look, we've got some elements here that I feel we could impart onto Deborah and her team as part of a toolkit that they could potentially use. And we really anchor that around the Kaizen, and the Kaizen obviously is a workshop for continuous improvement. So we looked at some of the champions that we felt we had in Deborah's team, and we said, right, let's get this Kaizen workshop together. And let's see what we can manage, what we can do. So it was staff-led. So they looked at all their processes from A to Z within that kind of specimen reception. We facilitated, and they came out with some recommendations. And there's a couple that I remember. There was, in terms of inputting some of the tube data, there was about 16 or 17 steps on an IT system. And one of the team said, well, this is just ineffective. Why can't we make it 3 or 4? So we went back to IT within North Tyneside, and within 24 hours, they said, you're absolutely right. So you're just making subtle changes in IT. We looked at the desks, we looked at track, we looked at other areas. So there was a kind of a whole theme running through it where the team actually worked extremely well together. And they just tried things out. They went back into the lab over the course of 4 days and went, okay, does this work? And then they came back and said, no, we need to change it. So they actually had a whole part to play in redesigning what was going to be their future state from the current state in terms of the workflow through the lab. And that was just a brilliant thing to watch. So yeah, we employed or developed things like standard work for them to say, well, look, you know, the variations that Deborah was seeing in shifts, you know, from hour to hour or from day to day, how can we get that to be more consistent? So standard work is just one of the tools that we use to say that every person has the same process over the same time period, irrespective of shift. And we found that having that standard work made it was clearer. We had less variability between shifts. And we saw that actually worked extremely well, and they were ready to take on a kind of a new way of working. We also looked at daily management, and many of the people listening here are in the NHS, and they do huddles, daily huddles. We call it daily management. So that's where the team would get together and they would basically look at the real-time tracking of the KPI. So what was it like yesterday, and what do we need to do today? Is it the same, or is it better, or is it worse? And I think if you start doing that, the team were very clear that they could then spot issues really early on. And I think that's a real advantage. So we used the standard work, the daily management. We also had, there was a large whiteboard, if I remember rightly, in North Tyneside, right down the back end there, wasn't there? And one of the teams said, why can't we use this as visual management? You've talked to us about putting stuff on the board that's visual for us, so they could actually align targets, they could kind of signal the problems. But I think the best thing about it was that it kind of gave a more sustained engagement, because people were aware of what was happening real time in the lab. And that was a great thing to see, because having standard work, daily management, then seeing it and seeing them writing their comments and what improvements they could make was brilliant. And then ultimately, we did challenge them a little bit and say, if you've got to take this to NSEC at some stage, can you scale it by design? So that's another area we looked at. So standard work, daily management, the visual management piece, and then the scalability. But it all started really from that Kaizen, Deborah, where, you know, they did it themselves. We facilitated. So in terms of what Deborah said in the beginning, let's not do it to them. You know, let's do it with them and have them lead it. And I think one of the great things to see when we finished that Kaizen, and we got some of that team to present to Deborah, your leadership team, you know, within North Tyneside, they put the presentation together and it unfolded. This is what we want to do. This is what we're going to do. And the clinicians who were there as well, your hematologists, your chemists, were, I think, really kind of took a step back and said, wow, you know, this team has really come up with something that they felt could really enhance our clinical practice.
Yeah, it was kind of a proud mum moment, almost, watching the team deliver their project back to us, and ultimately asking for us to support them in the financial aspects of now being able to deliver it and put it in place. For me, that was a no-brainer. We'd already set some budget aside to be able to do this. We were very lucky in that respect. But watching their skills develop, but watching them really be able to articulate the benefit, not only to the patients, which obviously was our primary goal, but to themselves as well. And that notice board on a night, we asked them to engage and say, how did today feel? Was it a good day? Put a smiley face. Was it a not so good day? Put a straight face. Tell us why. What were the challenges? And they continued to evolve because they had the skill set to be able to do that. So doing the original piece of work was one thing, but then the refining it was something that we'd enabled them to do, and see some real tangible benefits to our patients, but also to the team. And it's much a nice place to work in now. So if we kind of fast forward a bit, from a really drab, horrible space, we did invest quite a lot. We turned the workstations round. They all sit facing each other now. It's a much more communal working environment. There's designed roles as part of the process that they rotate around to ensure that the work flows as efficiently as it possibly can. but the space has been redesigned and redeveloped as well so that it's fit for purpose, but delivers a much more pleasant, light and bright environment for the teams to work in as well. Somewhere where they can really take pride in the job that they're doing and feel appreciated, I would hope, for the fantastic job they do, because any laboratory manager knows without our fabulous teams at the front end in specimen reception, we haven't got a service, and we're not going to deliver our results to our patients. So taking the time to really work with them was hugely beneficial to the whole system as well as the team in question.
Deborah, you mentioned at the start these changes were in conjunction with a software upgrade. Was that happening at the same time as the Kaizen process that you and Hugo have just described?
Yeah.
How did that work in parallel?
In for a penny, in for a pound, Andy. Never want to shy away from a challenge in Northumbria. So yes, this was all happening probably in the 3 or 4 months prior to Clinisys Wimpath Enterprise coming in. So we were moving from Telepath, which had been in Northumbria for 38 years. So getting people to break out of some of those habits and move to Clinisys Wimpath was quite challenging as well. But we knew that dealing with some of our critical challenges around workflow had to happen to enable us to get the best out of Wimpath as well. So at the end, you never end, it's continual improvement, but at the end of this particular phase of the performance partnership work, we were still on Telepath and we were still on paper requests and plastic bags and having to unbag samples. If we fast forward kind of 6 months further on after the go live of Clinisys Wimpath, because of the work that we'd done in specimen reception, and the implementation of Clinisys, we are now completely paperless. We're almost entirely plastic free from our GPs. They come in red transport boxes. But because we'd enabled the front end of specimen reception with the end in mind, we knew that was where we wanted to get to. Our kind of roller trolley of how the samples move from being received and unbagged from our portering staff and our estates team bringing them in, our transport teams. We'd built all of that in as part of this process. So it wasn't a second huge change for the teams. It was an incremental improvement on what they'd already built. And yes, it took a bit of refinement, and like any good go live, it's never quite as seamless as you think. But I would say for that part of the project, we went live with Clinisys Wimpath Enterprise. We went live with the upgraded version of Clinisys ICE. We went to numbering at source, so we took out the paper and the plastic. We did a huge scale change all at once, but the enabling work was the work that we'd done with Performance Partnership to get it to a place where that aspect of it was smoother and more streamlined. I did enjoy putting my lab coat on for a couple of weeks though, and getting involved.
Okay, so after these changes were put into effect, after the software upgrade, could you tell us a little bit about some of the key outcomes there? What were the benefits? What were the main improvements as you saw them?
Yeah, so I think as Hugo said right at the beginning, the evidence base is absolutely critical. So you will have people that are hugely bought into wanting to do a project, all the way through to the people that say, well, why? It works perfectly now. And we knew it didn't work perfectly now. But if you come up with an evidence base that says, actually, it takes this long to get a sample from here to a centrifuge, and that's the impact that that's having on the patient. So we had our before and after metrics so that we could measure change within the system and kind of understand the success. So some of the really good ones were our kind of over 40% increase in capacity through that system. So if we put that into numbers, before we made the changes, we were processing about 1,500 samples an hour in specimen reception. After the performance partnership work, we were processing just over 2,000 samples an hour. They're huge numbers that we wouldn't have been able to manage had we not have changed the way we worked. And thinking about the sample sorting time, so that unbagging, that checking, that making sure, and this is all before WIMPATH came in. This is the first phase of change. So we still had paper, we still had checks to do, but we went from 20 seconds to just under 13 seconds to do some of these checks, because we had the right people in the right places at the right time to do them, and they worked as a team instead of a group of individuals that were all fighting for the same piece of the workload. And understanding how we changed all of those aspects of it were really, really critical. And ultimately, the kind of big one for me was that time to centrifugation. So we took 40 minutes out of the system. Well, just under. It took 40 minutes when we started this piece of work, and it took 8 minutes at the end. That's a massive improvement in a turnaround time that ultimately means we get the result out faster to a GP and potentially prevents them turning up at the front door of our ED service as well. So they were the tangible gains. They were the things that made the big difference to the patient. But the difference to the staff can't be underestimated as well. They were finishing on time, or even sometimes a little bit early. The number of staff that we needed in specimen reception could be reconsidered, but we've never, we would never make anyone redundant as part of a process like this. The whole point was that we could convert that time back into training and education and redistribution of role and workload, and all of those things have been able to happen as part of it. And my favourite bit was being able to nominate my team and Hugo's team for an IBMS award last year. And we were shortlisted. Sadly, we didn't win, but we were shortlisted. So being able to take all of the team down to London to celebrate their achievements and really just watch them being able to be rewarded for all their hard work was fabulous.
Hugo, from your perspective, can you talk a little about the results that you saw? Did they live up to what you expected? Were you surprised by any aspects?
No, I don't think I was surprised that we got some decent results, but the magnitude of those results was probably something I was like, well, I didn't expect, that big step change. I thought maybe it's a marginal change, if I'm honest, if I was going, from the discussions that we had, but it was a real big step change. I think that we saw specifically with those numbers that Deborah just presented. So I think all in all, it would really, it was about getting that stability. I think it was getting about the predictability as well. So the predictability was there now. So the numbers were reflecting predictability, the throughput, the consistency. And I would agree with Deborah. I think there was a measurable culture shift alongside that. I think based on the success and the feedback the specimen reception teams were getting from the clinicians about the timeliness of the results or the speed of getting it onto the analyzer, and therefore clinicians could make the timely results back to the patient. I think that was getting fed back, and I think they really kind of appreciated the fact that what they'd done and how they were doing it was working for them. So that, I think the cultural shift was a big win, and I think balancing that capacity and demand by being able to reduce that shift pattern by an hour and a half really did mean that you could reinvest that time. Time is like a currency in the lab. If you can give somebody more time, then they've got a better opportunity to operate top of license, develop themselves, educate themselves. And I think you can't underestimate that in a kind of an area where it is the heartbeats of a lab. Specimen reception is the heartbeat. Any variability in that has a massive effect downstream. So get that variability out, and the team kind of took care of the rest. And I think, the cultural shift and the way the staff reacted, and then and the clinicians reacted, I think was one of the big wins that I saw, irrespective of the results. Just that bit alone was very, very good.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned there about the positive results that you've been able to give back to the GPs. What was there much you asked of the GPs? You talked about changing the way specimens samples are managed. Did you ask anything of the GPs or the people supplying you samples? Were there any changes that were required of them to help you along that way?
Yes, absolutely. And as we went to Clinisys WinPath Enterprise and our upgrade device, they were the enablers that let us go to pass-through numbering, so taking the paper and the plastic out of the system. And we can only do that if our primary care colleagues, well, all of our service users, but our primary care colleagues are prepared to work with us on that. We're very big on sustainability in Northumbria as well. We have a big drive around that, and being able to remove hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper with sticky labels that can't be recycled was a real drive. Removing all of those plastic specimen bags from the system that are unnecessary and can't be reused. All of that was taken from the system. So there were some real tangible benefits to our GPs in saving them time and effort and in being able to do it. It doesn't happen without a few bumps. They're well noted in how you go through change and transformation. But ultimately, working with our stakeholders across the board, so some of our suppliers asking for the way we need things delivered to us, working with our GPs in how they're going to send their samples in. It's all about communication, isn't it? And we've learned a lot about that along the way. If you think you've communicated enough, you probably still haven't, so do it some more, and try and keep everyone as involved and as up to date with the changes you possibly can. I certainly took some lessons from some of that, but yeah, being able to bring the whole system along with the transformation is really important as well.
Okay, so to finally cover some more of the benefits, you mentioned, Deborah, the benefits of the staff there. Can you talk sort of more about the ongoing improvements? Obviously, Kaizen is continuous improvement. Has the culture changed that people are still looking to improve? You're still getting better. Is that the case?
Yeah, we absolutely still get better, and there's a lot of work still to do, but now we have people, in fact I interviewed one of our team members the other day who used the Kaizen as one of the examples during the interview, and so not only is it the day-to-day improvements that are happening in the lab, but the personal development that people have taken and can now evidence back to help develop themselves it can never be underestimated. But they're using these skills on a day-to-day basis. We ask for staff suggestions, for staff improvements and how we work on things. So specimen reception was first part of the journey for North Tyneside. The second part, again, working with colleagues in Beckman Coulter, we took the dividing wall down between chemistry and haematology and opened the space out so that our team became blood sciences and that they could work together in a more open plan environment. And again, it helps with how you move work around, it helps with the workflow. But our North Tyneside site is absolutely our enabling site because as of 2 weeks ago, we had planning permission for our new laboratory at the NSEC site. So again, working with our colleagues in Beckman, we're about to build a whole new, brand new state-of-the-art blood sciences laboratory with a fully tracked service. We will use all of the principles of Kaizen and the skills that the teams have learned to make sure that we have the most efficient way of getting samples from the delivery driver to a result to our patient at the end of it, and using those skills as part of laboratory design have been really, really beneficial as well. And our partnership with Hugo and the team continues because we're all part of that journey in the development at Northumbria. So having conversations about self-opening pneumatic tube systems that we can auto-accession onto the front end of a track, I kind of feel like I'm talking about things that belong on the planet that's behind Hugo on his backdrop there. But these are all things that incrementally have been achievable because of the work that we started in specimen reception and changing a mindset and changing a culture that had been ingrained for the 38 years that our legacy system had been in place. So it's really interesting to watch how the teams use those skills to be part of the development of what the future looks like.
Fantastic. Hugo, to come to you now, what would your recommendations be for laboratories facing similar sorts of challenges? How could they start adopting perhaps some of the methods that we've been talking about today?
Well, I think first of all, the NHS has a lot of data, and I think labs have a lot of data. I think don't be afraid to look at that data, reflect it back. Don't be afraid to use additional resources to look at that data, but it all starts with looking at data. I think it also reflects on the fact that you need to quantify where you think the bottlenecks are before you start looking at analyzers and stuff. So look at that, look at the data, understand where you feel your bottlenecks are. I think those are two key things I would say. I would also say design to replicate, as Deborah said, get the ambition to say whatever you're going to do, can we replicate it? Because Kaizen is continuous improvement, and you need to replicate the way that you work to be able to make these continuous improvements and kind of move forward. I would say run real Kaizens with the team. So get the team to run the Kaizen, get them involved, get that to be part of what they want to do. Now, facilitation is just a different area, but if they run real Kaizens themselves as a team, they can try storm what works. And I think that's important. So you try in the lab to see if it works. If it does, you lock that one down, and then you move on to the next one. And don't be afraid, as Deborah said, to try and to fail, because that is all about continuous improvement. And I think, lastly, measure what matters. Have a great understanding what you want to measure first, and be very clear about the problem statements that you're trying to achieve. And if you have that in mind, and you can reflect your own data back, you can understand where your current state was and where you want to get to. And I think get the teams involved very early on to help in that process. And I think those are probably the three things I would say as a start.
Deborah, anything to add there?
I'd completely agree with all of those, Hugo, and I'd probably add a couple more. Again, just to reiterate, start with the end in mind, but understand what the problem is. And you can easily go off on a tangent. I have a really fabulous pathology program manager in Northumbria, and she holds me to scope. So what's the scope? And don't let it creep outside of that, because it can go a little bit wrong quite quickly if you don't do that. My other one, and probably one of the big things that we took from this, standardize before you digitize. You cannot digitize in this world of LIMS and automation and digital, and our entire pathology departments are moving to a digital way of working, and rightly so, but you can't digitize a bad process. So take the time to get it right, to get it standardized, to do the work to make sure you've got your process as you would want it to be, and then digitize it. And that's what I think we did really well, and what helped with the WIMPath deployment that followed. We knocked all of the bumps out of it before we then made it digital. And it's about the people. So engage the people, but understand the people that aren't happy along the way. So keep communicating, keep the engagement going, and keep just questioning back. Have I got this? Were my assumptions about this right as a leader? Is that, are we doing the right thing? And just keep sense checking that back to yourself, because there will be challenges along the way, but fail early. So don't be afraid to get stuff wrong. Just keep trying. Because actually out of the failures come some of the best ideas. And we didn't get it quite right. We tried to squeeze in far too many workstations, and that's fine if all of your workforce is the same height and size, but often they're not. So we did have to space it out a little bit and lose a little bit of the workspace, but it didn't impact on the end result, and that's the important bit.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, both of you. So that brings to an end the question part of the presentation. I'm pleased to say we've got a good number of questions from the audience. A number of them are focusing on receiving samples, the reduction in plastic, the sample boxes, is sample tracking a benefit? Deborah, are you able to sort of explain a bit about how the sample transport, the sample reception process has actually changed? How do the samples arrived? With eliminating plastic, what has that been replaced by? Is there an increased risk of sample leakage? These are all things that have been shown up in the questions that have come through.
These are all the day-to-day operational challenges that we have, and we're still in this process. So lots of different aspects of it. Yes, we've removed our plastic for a lot of our samples. We now have transport boxes. If anyone wants to reach out, I can absolutely give you some details of them, but they are foam inserts that our vacutainers sit into, so you don't need to have plastic bags anymore. We do still use plastic bags for the less pleasant samples, or the samples that we need to be wary of. So things like our respiratory samples, our sputum samples will still come bagged, our enteric samples will still come bagged. We're not quite that far down the road, but the bulk of our samples are obviously our blood sciences, our vacutainers, and if you can make those changes quickly, that's fabulous. So in our GPs, they tend to have their inserts within their treatment areas, and then they lift and shift them into the wider transport boxes, and then our couriers and our drivers pick those up. They go into the big VersaPack transport bags, and then they come into the laboratory. And our quality manager has done a huge amount of work liaising with our GPs on how to make that process work. You need a huge number of transport boxes because you need obviously ones in GP, ones in the lab, and ones that are in transit. But you'll still find that you save money over the paper and the plastic that you used to have. They're all wipeable, they're all cleanable, they're all autoclavable if the worst does happen. But it's much, much easier for the teams to handle those samples. The second part of that, and that's a piece of work that we're still working on with another company actually called GP Liaison, and that's streamlining our transport routes. So what we get is the horrible 2 o'clock peak, and then we get the horrible 6 o'clock peak. And of course, every GP wants their samples collected at 5 o'clock at the end of surgery, but you just can't do that. So again, using the information that we have within our laboratory information management system around date and time of collection, we can then start to work around transport maps to route map the best journey for those samples to bring them in as efficiently as we can. And that may mean that some GPs get more collections, but they're on a route that we can manage, and some GPs may get slightly less collections, but all of their samples are ready at the back end of the day. Again, you can't be all things to all people, but the aim is to just flatten those peaks as much as you can, and that ultimately impacts on how we get samples through specimen reception as well. So there's no one magic wand. It's incremental gains. It's how we just take the little nuggets of improvement from lots of different processes to make the bigger picture that the patient gets the result faster at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here, Deborah, talking about how much effort was put into demand management. Were you able to sort of look at priority sample identification? Were there any new workflows established for acute care and so on?
Yeah, so as I say, we have 2 hospitals, so a lot of our acute work is at NSEC anyway. There is acute work at North Tyneside, absolutely, but we've also worked with changing of the barcode labels to a different colour. So if it's coming from somewhere like ICU or ED, it'll have a yellow sticker on it. So visually, and again, this is all visual management and how we've learnt our skills from Hugo and his team, so that things are visually much more clear about which pathway they should be moving through the lab as well. So that's something that we're working on at the moment, changing our labels to match the priority pathways through the department. But yeah, it's just taking what you've learned and then streamlining it a little bit further. Sorry, Andy, what was the other part of that question?
The other part was, were new workflows established for acute care? Have you answered that with labels?
Yeah, I've got that. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the label piece. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we've had a few questions as well regarding the actual time taken. I think going down from 40 minutes to 8 minutes is obviously a significant achievement and great figure. Are you able to sort of pinpoint where the big gains there were actually made? Is it just because the samples are arriving in a better format?
No, I think it's actually how we manage the unpacking and hitting the booking in process smoother. I think that's the important bit. Previously, the work was taken out of the big VersaPack bags into one big holding area, and then we would try to divvy it out so that microbiology samples were just put to one side, but the blood sciences samples were just in the big boxes. And each of the team would grab a handful, turn around, sit at their desk, and then unbag and unfold and manage their own work. So they'd have their own bin of plastic bags and their own pile of request forms. And now there's 2 or 3 people that sit at the top end of the kind of track. They do all of the unpacking. They drop them into coloured boxes that hit the front end of the rollers. And they roll down, and as one of the team members are able, they'll take a box, they'll bleep them in, they'll put them back on the roller in a different coloured box and send them down for centrifugation. So the whole way of delivering it was very, very different. But there's no one slow person in the chain anymore, because they are working as a team instead of a whole load of individuals with a whole pile of awfulness in front of them and not really knowing where to start.
Mm-hmm. A couple of questions have referenced the new software you've had and the booking in procedure. Are you able to share any benefits within the lab specimen reception of the new software?
Oh yeah, I mean, as I say, getting the samples unbagged and moved through was absolutely critical. But now, from a clinicist's point of view, you literally do bleep, bleep, and it moves on to the next place. Obviously, our teams still need to do the PID checks, so it's just at a different point in the process. So the sample is labelled with the barcode, the tests requested, and the patient demographics. So the first bleep is to input that into the system. All of that is checked on the screen. So not now paper to sample, but sample to screen. And the second bleep confirms everything is correct, and then the sample moves on. So much more efficient. Ultimately, when we get to a fully tracked system as part of our new laboratory, automated specimen accessioning on the front end will mean we can rack the samples directly, and they'll be accessioned by the analyzer into the LIMS. But again, that's the next incremental step. And then we can use our teams differently for different jobs and give them different levels of job satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've got a couple of questions asking about the use of data and analysis. Hugo, as this is your area, have you noticed or is there a different way now that the team in the laboratory use data and are able to adjust accordingly?
I don't think I can speak from the guys in North Tyneside, but I think to start with, they were pulling data, but perhaps didn't really know what they were looking for with it. So I think that's where we came in and said, kind of reframe what they had on their LIS and their LIMS system. So I can't speak to how they're perhaps managing now, but in general, when we go into labs and we're asked about what efficiencies can we make, we do say we need to start pulling some data, because really data is, you're seeing the unseen. You can go into a lab and go, oh, that looks efficient, but the underlying data will probably tell you there will be areas in there that can be improved. And it's just being able to leverage that and just reflect it back to say, this is what we see. are you seeing the same thing? And sometimes there's an aha moment because they're unaware that, you know, the way that it can be interpreted is something that then they can use to kind of look and see where these bottlenecks are. So there's a couple of things there. One, I can't comment on the North Tyneside piece, but I know at the time this is a process, and I think, you know, moving forward, one of my recommendations to any lab is to kind of look in the data, spend the time on it, reflect it back, and it will show you things that perhaps you won't see when you're wandering around the lab or even working in the lab on a day-to-day basis.
I think as well, Hugo, there were a few things that we would have probably shied away from if you hadn't have suggested them as well. So I vividly remember saying, we want to understand the performance of the individual members of staff. Now, that's not about criticising Fred versus Sue versus Bob. That's about that standardisation piece and understanding the process that enables Fred, Bob and Sue to be able to work the same way at the same time. All of, you know, asking people to get involved in that is quite hard because they do feel like they're being watched or they're going to be criticised or challenged. But all of that data was anonymised. It wasn't about the person, it was about the process. But Hugo's team dealt with that so sensitively, so beautifully, that I don't think that ever threw up any of the problems that made me go, oh, you can't do that.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thank you, Deborah. And yes, I mean, because, you know, part of the work that we do is we pull data, but we do spend 3 to 4 days on site, and we are there for all the shifts. So observation allows you to pull the data, reflect back, but also observe what's happening, because Sue, for example, who may not be as productive as Alan, Sue might be answering the phone, or, you know, might be having to go to the shoot and not sitting bum on a seat for 4 hours. So by going in observing as well, you are getting that kind of triangle. You get to talk to the people, you get to look at the data, and you get to observe the people. And once you triangulate everything, it really does give you a full picture of exactly what's happening in the lab at any one time.
It also helps them feel really engaged, really part of the process.
Okay, I think we've got just about time for one last question to address before we bring a close to proceedings. And we've had a couple of questions about equipment being used actually at GP surgeries. Have centrifuges been considered there, for example, and do they have their own barcode printers?
Yes, they have their own barcode printers. No, they don't have centrifuges, but across Northeast and North Cumbria, again, because of some of the geography of what we're dealing with, some of our GP practices do have their own centrifuges. So it depends on the specifics of the setting. And again, also understanding the data. If the samples are coming in and there's no effect on stabilization, then we'd want them in as soon as possible, and we'd rather match the transport to the requirements as much as possible. But yes, in Cumbria, for example, they use centrifuges out in GP practices to stabilize before they're collected and shipped. So a variety, but barcode label printers, yes, as part of Clinisys WIMPATH, and Hannah reminds me regularly, we deployed over 2,000 Zebra printers across both acute and GP to be able to do labelling at source.
Okay, fantastic. So that brings us just about to the end of our time available to us this morning. So thank you very much to our speakers, obviously, Deborah, Hugo. Thank you for sharing your experiences and the learning from the Performance Partnership. I think we've covered a lot of ground this morning, and sincerely hope our audience would have found that very interesting, with lots to take away back to their own laboratories and their own projects. Thank you everybody for watching, for joining us this morning. Really hope you found it enlightening and useful. If you do have colleagues or contacts you think would benefit from what's been discussed this morning, there is going to be a recording of the webinar available on the Pathology in Practice website very shortly. If you have found this interesting, I'd also encourage you to sign up to the Pathology in Practice website to be kept aware of future webinars and to receive our weekly email newsletter if you haven't already. Just visit pathologyinpractice.com. And that brings the session to an end. Thank you very much for joining us today. Our final thanks to Deborah, to Hugo, thank you both, and to Beckman Coulter Diagnostics. I hope everyone has a great day and a very pleasant weekend. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.